Welcome to RPG Reanimators, a podcast for GMs where we dissect horror scenarios and offer our experiences and advice to Reanimated at the table. I'm Lex.
I'm Nathan.
I'm Alex.
I'm Holly.
So let's see what's on the slab. The case report for this session is Puppet Shows and Shadow Plays, which is a scenario written by Adam Scott Glancy for Delta Green. In this scenario, agents investigate a series of disappearances along a stretch of Highway 70 in Arizona nicknamed the Devil's Highway, only to find the string of bodies may lead to greater heights than they could imagine. As with any dissection, we'll be discussing all of the gross innards of the scenario, so from this point on, there will be spoilers. So if you're interested in playing the scenario, please stop here and share this episode with your GM so that they can listen and consider running this for your group. We'll also include links for where you can purchase a copy of this scenario for yourself in the show notes of this episode. Now, with that out of the way, let's begin our dissection. So, Holly, you're back as our special guest again. Can you tell us what's going on, both in this current version of the scenario that was released, and also we'll make some references to the original publishing of the scenario as well.
Sure. And if I make any missteps, I'm most familiar with the original. So if I make any missteps with kind of the updated, please feel free to interrupt. The premise is that this alien of unknown origin and unknown species arrives to Earth, obscured in a meteor shower, and lands in West Virginia. And from that point begins a spree of murders across the United States, because the way that it operates is that it kind of inserts itself, uses a human as a host, forces that human to carry out horrific acts of violence, and it really feeds on that because the host is awfully aware of all of the actions it's taking, even though it can't, it's all against its will. So it's kind of feeding on that anguish, that despair, and also physically feeding, because as the host is carrying out murders, it's consuming the blood of the victims. And when the host becomes suspected of this by the local law enforcement in this area, it then proceeds to hop a body, catch a ride, and keep moving. And that is kind of where the scenario starts. Is it's made it all the way to Arizona from West Virginia.
And so how are the player characters brought in to this?
The scenario itself really sells itself on being an intro to Delta Green more than anything else. It does mention that you can bring in established agents, but that it highlights that it's probably best done for people who have not, they're brand new to Delta Green. And so ideally they are FBI agents in the area of these events, so probably Phoenix, and they've been called in because 13 disappearances is simply too much for the law enforcement to ignore anymore, and it's come to the attention of the national government at that point, federal government.
And in this case, they're entering into a bit of a jurisdictional spider web, if I understand right. There's supposed to be FBI coming in. Some of these disappearances have happened on Native American reservations, some of them not.
Right. And, Delta Green, in the past, I've noticed that they do like to play up that angle of like local law enforcement typically doesn't love the federal government stepping in and taking over investigations. It's a trope, but a good one. Like it's, you can really play up that aspect of it, but also an interesting, like, kind of creating a spider web of this is also that the local native law enforcement plays a part in it too, and they're also very mistrustful of not just the local law enforcement but the federal government as well. So you can add tension to that in that way.
Nathan, can you tell us any key locations in the text? Do we actually go to the Devil's Highway?
You really should, because that's going to be your main area of search for this really manhunt that you're on. You're going to be looking up and down, looking through abandoned cars there. You're also probably going to find things like a buried car with some of the victims in it, the Bagai property. Not quite sure how you pronounce that, but a horrible scene of mass murder and sheep murder. There is kind of the police station, the tribal liaison that we'll talk about later that you may butt heads with or get help from. And there's also, at the very end, a sacred cave that this being has been hiding out in.
And do we get a lot of details on any of these locations? I know that the new release of the scenario comes with a handout packet, but most of the handouts look like they're just these sky down Google Earth views of the location. Is there any other sorts of details that we can have to try and build these locations for our players?
There's decent little write-ups on each of them that, a few paragraphs that describe what's there, what happened, um, roughly the clues that can be found. But as we'll cover later, there's not a lot of investigative clues that can help in the manhunt necessarily.
Hmm. And speaking of not a lot of help in the manhunt, Alex, can you tell us about any key NPCs described in the scenario as written?
Sure. First, we have Patrick Hobson, who's the special agent in charge, and if one of the player characters is with the FBI, they will be directly reporting to him. Then, in Arizona itself, we have Major Frank Garrett, who is I just read what you wrote.
He is literally described as charming but racist. It's
Yeah, that's a little
interesting set of
uncomfortable for sure.
adjectives. Uh-huh.
Yes, so then we have Major Frank Garrett, who is a racist but charming lawman and part of the police force. And then we have Police Chief Alejandro Colorados, which is the Apache Tribal Police Liaison, because we do have a lot of jurisdiction in this area. We have Palmer Valor, who actually was a Native American shaman that summoned the help that the agents might receive. And that's a little complex because in the previous versions, he summons a coyote spirit, who is in fact a big player, giving clues to the player characters. But there is another option where it can just be like the energies of the shaman. And I believe in the new edition, it's just Nyarlathotep.
Yeah. In the new edition,
Yep.
he's getting slowly murdered by the so in the original edition it's referred to as the Traveler, in the current one it's the Discorder. And as he's getting slowly murdered, he manages to do a chant to summon the coyote spirit as just one last vengeance. He knows it's a bad idea, but needs to do anything to try and get back at this thing. And lo and behold, Nyarlathotep answers the call once again and is embodying the coyote spirit to try and provide some additional assistance with a little asterisk for it to the agents, at least in the scenario as written.
But only if the shaman makes a nice picture of him first.
Of course.
And then we have two major players that are really acting in the background, and that is the Majestic 12 organization, as well as Delta Green, represented by Miss Green. And of course, we have the main threat of the scenario itself, the Discorder or the Traveler, or the thing possessing Emmanuel Santana's body.
So, Holly, can you go over some of the key events described in the scenario, just starting from the beginning and working our way through?
Sure thing. Now, do we want to like zoom out to the entire timeline, or more specifically to where the point where the players get involved?
I would say when the players get involved.
That's fair. Yeah. So
Everything else is sort of an exposition dump, so sure, let's start with the
You
briefing.
mean half the scenario?
Uh,
So key events that occur in the scenario are, of course, all of the disappearances that precede the player involvement, and then once the players get involved, there is it's a lot of reacting to events that happen. So the car that belongs to the police officer from Houston is uncovered. And so they get a little bit of information about maybe this thing, the pattern of what this thing is, because if they go digging into the police officer's background, they learn that, he had committed all of these horrific murders in Houston and then fled. And the Begay Ranch, where the family was originally assumed to have just disappeared from, the bodies are revealed from the coyote spirit that like they had just been buried on the property. So that is another key point in the investigation, is they discover the family. They get a little bit more information on what the medically what happens with these bodies. And then from that point, it's the cave where Santana is currently residing, and players can locate that.
And can they catch him while he's there?
No, well, you can have a showdown with him, but maybe he's not there.
You can have a
It's
showdown and he gets away,
then he
or
gets
you could go
away.
at night and he's not there and just sees you and gets away.
Well, that's important because you need to have him run for the manhunt.
Right,
Yes.
which should be thrilling and tense, I understand, as written.
There's a
The-
lot of tense emotions running through this podcast right now, listeners. Hey, but you forgot about the bundle of information that's also dropped at the agent's doorsteps.
I did forget that because that is a big change that I do make. Because all criticisms aside, I think the thing that I personally as a handler didn't like about it was that there was the discovery and the investigation aspects, which just weren't there. So I took out a lot of that information, just falls at the player's feet so that they could have a chance to actually discover things in time on their own.
Sure. And we'll definitely dive a lot deeper into that in our reanimation section. As written in the scenario, all of these leads, like the Begay Ranch, the buried car, all of these other factors, there's not a lot of information for agents to uncover that's just hitting periodic dead ends until they just get mailed a package that gives them half of the scenario's info dump at once and says, you need to go here next.
I do have a question. Holly, have you run the very last scene that they have here is in theory you have a manhunt, uh Santana is gunned down by an overwhelming force, and the last thing they suggest is having an autopsy scene, not at all exactly the same as the autopsy episode of Cabinet of Curiosities.
Completely
Uh,
different. Its own
Completely
unique
different.
thing.
And I think that's as written how this is supposed to end is kind of a big shootout or something within this morgue.
Right.
Have you ever included that? Has that happened for you?
No, because in the times that I've run it, players being the clever players that they are realize that this is a body that should be burned because it becomes
Hmm.
something within, like something within it is not right. Now, if you're playing with people who have never played Delta Green, who are truly doing a great job of not metagaming and playing the part of just we are just FBI agents, then they may go the route of an autopsy. But once you involve Delta Green agents who know about the unnatural, I think there's a high likelihood they're going to burn the body anyway. And both times I've run it, they've burned the body.
I totally agree with that, Holly. It largely depends on what PCs you start this scenario with.
Mm-hmm.
I would just go a step further and say I think it's very unlikely that any players that I have run games for would allow the body to go to autopsy, especially providing just a few distinct clues as they keep shooting at Santana and the body keeps going,
keeps
even though
rising,
it
yeah.
should be dying, and this, that, and the other. And tabletop role-playing gamers and pyromaniacs are basically synonyms that after seeing that, everyone would say kill it with fire. Out of curiosity, Majestic is referenced as an option to bring in if one would so choose. What would their roles be in trying to influence any key events in the scenario, as written again?
In my mind, the Majestic agents see that there are already a group of people on the scene and they recognize the inherent threat of it. So they're happy to watch it unfold and then jump in whenever it is that the crucial pieces have been acquired. And then they can say, well, thank you very much for all your hard work. This belongs to us now. I guess there's a million ways you can play Majestic. I know that everyone has different opinions on how they should operate and what actions they should take. But I think that if you want to maintain that this is truly like the Men in Black, they don't really want their faces plastered on things. They don't want people knowing who they are. They're just going to watch the investigators. Someone's on this case, great. We'll step in and get our stuff whenever it's necessary.
And as written, it really backs exactly what you're saying. There's a
Yeah.
lot of they won't fight the agents. If the agents arrest them or something, they'll willingly go and then get sprung
Yeah.
out of jail a little later, that they legitimately don't care. And if you are using Majestic, they do have a bit of a write up where kind of that final autopsy scene we talk about, if you somehow get there, exactly your point. They'll swoop in, take off the body for all kinds of research, that sort of thing.
And I didn't hate that. I know that
Mhm.
when we play Delta Green, or just in general, the general a lot of players like to kind of do a run and gun, like fast and loose, and to see Majestic written as careful and like, yeah, sure, you can arrest us, that's fine, because nothing will come of this. We will be sprung from jail. There's not going to be a huge shootout. They're not going to flex and draw firearms because, like, why? What's the point in that? They're going to get what they want in the end anyway. And I kind of like that, actually.
Yeah, I will also admit the Majestic section was one of the few sections I actually liked in this scenario because they were coming from very high-ranking Air Force officials, and it very much felt like top-down abuse of power, thy name is Majestic, and that making those more of the devious ends, that they can do all that they can, but they're still going to be susceptible to government politics, where they have the upper hand.
Red tape will have us all in the end.
And it's a good idea to read that if you're running or playing a program game, because those options are actually available more to your players.
So with all of that said, what would you all say is the beating heart of this scenario?
For me, it's Michael Shea's autopsy. Like, that is the story of the autopsy, and maybe that's not what you're asking and I've misinterpreted it, but like the story of the autopsy is what is the most interesting part of this.
I consider this the epilogue to Michael Shea's autopsy.
Yeah. And so anyone listening who would like to run this and would like inspiration, I would recommend reading Michael Shea's The Autopsy, or if you don't have the time or resources, Netflix's Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, a 7-episode on it.
Episode
It's well
3.
done. So
Yeah, it's a great
Best one.
episode.
Best one.
I look at this as the manhunts kind of the thing, right? Is if you're running this as a initially Delta Green, as an intro thing, it's all about just a manhunt that turns into more.
Yeah, I would add on to that once they start the manhunt and they identify Emmanuel as the target via the fingerprints after he just shoots up a police station and gets away with it and then gets fingerprinted, then that is when the player characters have all this power, all these people in their tool belts, dogs, helicopters, whatever. And that power trip can really make that manhunt seem fun.
Okay, now for the part that I've been waiting for. Let's discuss some of the general strengths and limitations of the scenario as written.
Not until you hit me with a... It's time for reanimation. Oh, no. Fuck.
It's not.
It's not
That's
time
right,
for
son.
I want to reanimate this.
This ain't my first rodeo, cowboy.
Everything in my body wants me to hack this up.
No, I'm just going to blast it to pieces first, and then we get to rebuild it.
All right,
Better,
all right.
stronger, faster.
I will go first. I will say that the player characters are just reacting to a lot of stuff. There's no way for them to be proactive. They're handed down clues that, while, yes, they tell you a little bit more about how the Traveler or the Discorder operates, it doesn't tell you how to find it unless it's until you get to the point where the answer to find it is handed to them multiple times.
I fully agree. I have a lot of thoughts on this scenario because, as someone who's still fairly new to Delta Green in the past few years, this scenario often gets hyped up as one of the classic or quintessential DG scenarios. And while Convergence really lives up to its hype, this one doesn't. And it really suffers from a lot of what I would consider role-playing game sins at this point. It feels like the author read The Autopsy by Michael Shea and thought up a neat short story or a headcanon movie of what could happen next from it, then decided to frame it instead as a Delta Green scenario that is completely railroady so people can play through his head movie exactly the way that he envisioned it. There is very little opportunity for players to actually investigate and find things and make meaningful progress before getting shunted into the next area. Or anytime that they do try and find something, say that they pick up this ship in the cave, they are completely met with a brick wall because, oh, if they find this and want to do anything with it, tough shit, they can't. It's going to go into the thing so that it can get stolen later, so that we can have the other manhunt later. There's no opportunity for players to actually exercise meaningful agency and influence in this. It is purely a series of cinematic events that we are instructed to make thrilling and tense the entire way. Many sections of this feel like someone read a Wikipedia article, then tried to parrot different information about hormones and the limbic system and other sorts of biological factors. There was a pretty big issue that I kept asking the whole time while reading this, is there's a lot of issues with timelines and body necrosis. First off, it doesn't actually give you a start date for whenever the briefing happens. You're told that some of the bodies went missing in July, and presumably you're going to pick up in August, maybe September. It says that it's hot in Arizona, which isn't exactly specific. But it does give some general, like, that, what is his name? Not Kenneth Branagh.
Braverman.
Kenneth Braverman. Whenever they find Kenneth Braverman's body, that he's been dead for approximately 5 weeks. So you can do some math and try and figure out when you should have your briefing in there from that. But I digress. The main hints that can be found from each of these bodies are small IV syringe pinprick wounds that are very tiny and put just at the heads of the adrenal glands and into the amygdala and the nervous system, and maybe a couple of other interesting locations. If a body has been clay pot baking in a car underground in Arizona heat for 5 weeks, that's going to be nearing on the consistency of a meat pie. And it's not going to be conducive to actually finding meaningful factors in there. Okay. So then we could say, let's look at the Begay's property, because that's the whole family that's gone, and then some of their sheep as well. And they all have the same exact wounds. We also don't know exactly how long that they were buried. We are told that the Nyarlathotep coyote spirit has uncovered them. And whenever the agents arrive, that there's vultures everywhere. Okay. If there are vultures everywhere, there are 25 or 26 sheep that are missing, and then a family of 4 to 6. That's a lot of vultures that are going to be everywhere. And it mentions that the decomposition may not be so bad, but they've been picked at by the carrion and the insects after they've been exposed. It's another case where the scenario tells you, roll medicine, you find this. But that plausibility was really difficult for me to follow, even as trying to give it some allowances there.
Feels a little more like a Hannibal or something, right? Where they get the body into or bones, right? They get this body in and look at it under this microscope and say, "Look, this pinprick itty bitty thing on this molar.
Exactly.
Well, we can completely reconstruct the events now." Kind of strains credulity a little bit.
Exactly. All of this played out like an NCIS episode, with all of the leaps in logic inherent in that. There's also a factor where it keeps saying that with a medicine or a surgery or a biology, some kind of science role to do science things, you can find that there was cell death or necrosis prior to death in all of these bodies. How would you tell that? I recommend flavoring up. We can get into this, of course, in reanimation, but have some additional ways that you could make that a little more apparent. I'm already talking too much, so I'm going to pass the mic off to someone else before I continue on with this rant.
Well, Holly, why don't you? What brought you to this? What made you kind of want to run this? Because we, Alex and I, at least ran it. Kind of jumping ahead a little, or didn't run it. We played in it, and it was a
Right.
lot of fun.
Yeah. I think so. What brought it to my attention originally was that the community, by and large, kind of recommends it as an intro to Delta Green scenario. I'd heard a lot of good things. I think nowadays, Last Things Last has probably replaced it, but I'd always heard it was like this really like early Delta Green quintessential. So I was like, oh, let's go check it out. And I think that the story behind it, the autopsy by Michael Shea is very compelling and makes for an interesting story. I am a huge fan of non-mythos entities, as my appearance on the podcast last for Uncle Timothy's Will should tell you. So I think it's more interesting. It's more interesting to challenge your players who might come in with a lot of mythos knowledge anyway. And then it gets them thinking, like, what the hell is this? Every time I've played this with people, it's always, what the hell is this? And in a good way, though. Like it keeps your players on their toes because they don't know what it is. There's no mythos explanation for it. So that drew me to it for sure. And the majestic angle, because there is admittedly, I haven't read all the scenarios published or even half, but it seems like there are not a ton of scenarios in which majestic is specifically written to kind of intervene. And I like that. I think that's a fun angle. So both of those things drew me to it.
Yeah, I like one of the strengths for this if you were doing a 90s campaign, and I'm hoping we see a little bit more of this from the Eyes Only reprint that's coming out that discusses the fate in particular. It seems like this covers a lot of things like Stephen Alvis, um, the fate, majestic, things that you might come back and see in a 90s campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can I jump back in
Oh,
again?
please do.
Okay, great. What are the Traveler or the Discorder's motivations aside just continuing to fuck things up and just camp out in the wilderness? He has crash landed, he has been here for a while, and then you describe this interesting sort of path of mayhem across the United States, and now he's camped out along this highway because it's easy pickings. Great. What does it, why? Why is it here? Why is it doing anything?
They do, yeah, they do cover it, but
Do they?
it's kind of described as it's now addicted to the kind of secretions, right? The adrenaline, the sciency terms that they talk about. It's hooked on a feeling of pain and suffering from its victims.
Well, and the way it's written too, it seemed to me that the traveler made a conscious choice to come here. It wasn't like, oopsie daisy, I'm on Earth now, and what shall I ever do? It's like it chose to come here, I think, for food. So and yeah, I think you're right, Nathan. It becomes addicted to how human despair kind of feels and tastes.
That said, I do agree, Lex, is this feels more like a one-off episode of X-Files where, you have, oh, there's a murderer. It turns out to be a throat alien. Okay, there's nothing really to tie it into anything larger. There's no follow-up you can really do with the alien. It's just kind of a murderer.
Well, and for a one shot, that can be fine. The GMs themselves are not given any details. The Traveler is an unnameable alien species that came from the stars beyond and crash landed and is here going ripshit riot on random people. And he has his ship and apparently can leave within 15 minutes, but doesn't because we need to have a cool manhunt and a showdown.
Yeah, there's just a lot of inconsistencies there.
Okay, and finally, last thing. I'm so sorry for holding things up. This scenario suffers from hiding major clues, critical clues for the scenario behind random skill checks. A lot of persuade rolls, one persuade roll cannot pass unless your players roleplay good. Other ones, if you don't pass your medicine or your science skill check, then you just don't get critical information to continue it on. Okay, I'll stop now. I promise.
No, I think that's a good point. And what's kind of tougher, and Holly, you've addressed this before, is there's a lot of cases where all the information in the world won't get you anywhere. There is no next step the agents could necessarily follow until a new clue is given to them by the coyote spirit, by Miss Green, by something. It really is
Right? The FBI,
right. They're just kind of sitting
the
there
liaisons,
waiting
yeah,
for the next
everything.
package drop, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Where's the agency? Where's the opportunity for them to be more proactive?
It's in the reanimation section is where it is.
Yeah, and this is what really prompted a major overhaul on my part was that once you get into Brave Women's car is uncovered, the Big A family is uncovered, there's at least something for the players to do, like to look into, to investigate. Oh, I can use my skills here. But when they're first called in, there's nothing. Like they just have a list of disappearances and they have the cars, but there's nothing to be uncovered in those. There's no evidence to learn. They can go to the sites. There's nothing to reveal. So it just kind of feels like you're testing your players' patience a little bit. That was really the biggest thing for me.
Okay, I lied. I'm not done yet. You're both testing your player's patience, but also it assumes several big ingenuity investigation steps.
Mhm.
Braverman's car, as described, is super difficult to find unless they are doing an aerial search. What rationale they would have to do an aerial search from the get go, because they're already coming into these missing people's cases pretty late? I don't know. Um, this Nyar Coyotep is trying to give clues and howlings and things as they can because, in my opinion, the agents needed something to help guide them from one of these clues to the next in a similar choo-choo fashion.
But it's not that helpful, which is the other very funny part to me is it's there to provide help, but all the help it provides is very vague in terms
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh, it digs up a car. That's a pretty active thing. The other time is it howls when they're near a place. That I don't know a lot about Arizona, but I'm not sure a coyote howling is enough of a clue to to get me somewhere,
That's
right?
also one of my favorite things is in the police station, it says like, oh yeah, there was coyote howling everywhere, but no one reacted. Oh, such a loss. I'm like, dude, have you been to Texas? Like, yeah, that's just nonstop. And Alex, you do raise a good point that even if they don't do anything and don't do the search, don't find the car, someone finds it 2 days later and reports it to them. So it also assumes a very slow pace of investigation, at least much slower
Mhm.
than any games that I have run, because my players typically just try and hit the ground running and knock this out. So you're going to need to have some creativity in when you want to hand players clues if you're running this as written.
Yeah, well, it just seems like a big flow chart that all leads to the same conclusion. If the agents investigate it, they get the clue. If they don't investigate it, they still get the clue. It's because it's just given to them on a silver platter.
Why even play, really?
Well, in its defense, somewhat, it is an intro scenario. If I was completely new to the game, I might find that helpful, right? To have ideas for the safety valves that, as an experienced GM, you're a little bit more used to. Oh, they missed a clue. Oh, I got to rethink where to put that. This verbalizes some of that. Unfortunately, I do agree that it ends up feeling very linear and there's not enough to have the agents take a clue and go with it and end up to the next point without that help.
I can 100% see where you're coming from. But in this instance, what else are they going to be doing? If they miss a clue, they're just sitting on their hands. There is
Mhm.
nothing else for them to investigate aside from just wander in the scrub wastes. And I do think that it is a fair point, but in this case, it doesn't quite deliver on that. I'm sorry, Holly, I think I cut you off.
No, it's fine. I think that this is actually to kind of correct the assertion that it's a good intro to Delta Green. I think it's
Mhm.
better to say it's a good intro to, well, maybe not a good intro, but more suited as an intro to RPGs. Full
Hmm.
stop. Like if you have a group of people, you're making a face at me, Lex. I'm not saying it's necessarily good. I'm saying that um,
It is one of the RPG scenarios of all time.
I think I think that if you have newbies who have never tried an RPG before in their lives ever, like I think even people who come from completely different
Hmm.
systems are going to have different, like they're going to have expectations of more information, or if I investigate something will come out of this. So maybe it's really a sign of the times of like, when this was written, it was like people, you played D&D or you played like Call of Cthulhu and that was about it. So, maybe it's a good intro to people who've never tried an investigative type of game. I don't know, but
I would be very scared to show this to a group of complete newbies as this is what these games are like because this is not great. If I ran a group of complete newbies who had never played a tabletop role-playing game scenario before, and do you know what I ran them through? Last things last. Like if you want an intro
Mhm.
scenario that has things that you can investigate, sure, it's linear, it goes from one place to another, but there's things that people can do every step of the way and they can lead to different outcomes. The main bad guy is so statted out. He is incredibly lethal. You're encouraged to bring in meat sponge NPCs so they can get shot so that you don't instantly kill your players because he has like 83 or 93%, like a 2d10 damage. And there's nothing that they can do. They are encouraged to sit on their hands and watch Adam Scott Glancy's mental movie. Now I'm done.
I'm inclined to agree with Lex here, because if you're gonna show off a new system or a new scenario, you should like pull out all the stops, give them the best of the best.
Totally fair. That
Yep.
is fair.
And but there's a way to do that, but also introducing them to the IP or the universe.
Right.
And I think having them all be friendlies or people unaware of DG, that's pretty good. Like I liked how the option where they aren't part of Delta Green, so they are just investigating and finding weird stuff until they get recruited. Like that's completely appropriate. I wouldn't do for a beginner game where they need prior knowledge of the world.
I think that actually would be really interesting. And part of this would be you'd have to know your players already. But if you didn't tell them that this was an alien type game, and you just said, no, you guys are playing FBI people looking into this. And as they go, when they find the ship, it really is a kind of pin drop of like, oh, wait, what? What do you mean we found an alien ship? Well,
Yeah,
oh,
that's
this,
awesome.
this
that's
exactly
great.
like
That's cool.
this.
Welcome to Delta Green.
Maybe this isn't just a mass murderer cannibal, because up to then you just have this interesting sort of chain of bodies and deaths that doesn't make any real sense. Maybe that would be fun.
Why wouldn't you just run Future Perfect Part 1?
Fair point.
Now, before we get into reanimating this scenario and addressing all of these issues that we've brought up, we'd like to contextualize our general experiences with this scenario. I have only read it and would like my money back.
I've read it. I've read it multiple times, both versions, and I've run it twice. And the first time I ran it, I tried to run it more by the book, and the second time I did a complete overhaul. So I have experience with both.
And I got to play in Holly's run for ITD.
I was also a player in Holly's ITD run.
That was the complete overhaul version.
It was fun.
You might call it the reanimated version.
The reanimated version, if you will. Yes.
So now let's finally get into reanimation. Holly, since we have a majority of experience with your reanimated campaign that I have no experience with, I have willingly not watched it. How did you highlight the beating heart of this scenario?
That's a great question. And when you ask that, you're saying like for my players, like how is it that I kind of highlight it for the players themselves?
Yeah, like what are the awesome parts of the scenario or the themes that you really wanted to enunciate?
I really liked and we'll get into this in the reanimated section, but I really liked you have this creature that is completely capable of just changing bodies to the point where your investigation becomes dangerous and confusing. And it's like, well, we know we're hunting this guy right now, but what if tomorrow it's not this guy anymore? What if the guy I just talked to is the guy? Is the person inhabited by this creature now? So I really liked that. And so I made some changes to reflect it appropriately. But I liked that idea of it could be anybody, even if you think you know who it is. It could be anybody because it can change at any time. And the manhunt aspect that Nathan and Alex both highlighted, I think is really interesting. And there's ways you can tweak it and make it better, but this idea that someone is always just 2 steps ahead of you and you're just following along in their wake of destruction, and this despair from an investigator standpoint of my slowness to this investigation means more people are going to suffer and more people are going to die, and you're working on a ticking clock. And at what point does this guy get away from us, and now there's reports coming in from California or Oregon or Washington.
In that instance, did you have more people dying during the investigation to put the pressure on them to try and stop it before it continues?
So what I wanted to do with this is I scaled it back a little bit to give the idea of a ticking time clock. I had the Begay family be attacked in the middle of the investigation, so that it was a fresh crime scene, and that the children of the Begay family were missing, and that the traveler had taken them with him. So now they're like, it ramps up the ticking time clock of it has 2 kids with him, and we don't know if they're alive or dead, but we need to take action now immediately because we have victims that we have names and faces for that we know are not dead. They may not be dead at this moment.
Yeah, I thought that was a lot stronger. I can see where I think the original intent was to have a long-term investigation that takes days and weeks to go through, but for a dynamic playthrough, I thought the missing kid was a really great scene. We had some time in the house to kind of worry that we were about to be attacked, and that really brought in that feeling of kind of like we talked about, that manhunt, like you were just on the trail of a serial killer that you just almost caught. If you had just been an hour earlier,
Hmm.
you would have nabbed him. And that captures kind of the great feeling from television shows, right? Is you see that foot going out the back door as you run in the front, and they're gone by that point.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
And it also highlights the character's failures. Like
Mhm.
you children are missing, people are dead, and it's because you are slow
Oh,
and you have still not caught him.
you sound like my dad.
But yeah, so as part of the like the Nathan was talking about, like the slow investigation that takes place over days and weeks, and you know what, I got to tell you, as a person who works for the government, the least exciting part of anything is the like actual government work simulation of it all. It's not fun.
Right. And like, let's give our players all the fun stuff to encounter, right?
Mhm.
Like, I get the setting the tone of having this government work and having all this red tape and bureaucracy, but sometimes it just doesn't feel like a fun time. Maybe a bit of it's appropriate for setup and getting the mood, but like when I'm a player, I prefer to like have my boots on the ground, find these clues, find everything. And I think one thing that would highlight this, some of the beating hearts of the scenario, because it's an alien, right? Multiple hearts. I would give the traveler, the alien, actual like cooler alien abilities. Maybe like it can spit
Mhm.
acid or spit this neurotoxin, stuff that will, one, make it more mysterious, and two, make it trackable.
Mm,
So
Mhm.
kill
Mhm.
two birds, one stone.
I like that. The thing that when I first read the scenario from beginning to end, the first question that had come to my mind was, if my players are Delta Green agents, what the hell is bringing this case to Delta Green's attention? Because it's just a bunch of missing people, which is unfortunate, but why does Delta Green care about that? So that was like the very first thing I had to figure out when I was reanimating all of this, was like, I need Delta Green to be called into this for something, for
Mhm.
some reason.
And what did you do?
Well, that began my complete overhaul of the list of victims. But I decided that one of the families, that the car was just abandoned on the side of the road, the husband and wife would be missing, and their little baby girl would be dead in her car seat. And the coroner's report would show that she had been drained of blood completely, and that the coroner had noted these weird pinprick marks, or however you want to play up the strangeness of the traveler. And that's where Delta Green gets involved, because what the fuck is that?
That's great.
So, and then I decided that at every victim, I wanted there to be a discoverable clue that my agents could find and track, and a clue that would have been clever enough that the local law enforcement wouldn't have already found it or already thought of it. So I went through, I kind of shaved down the list a little bit. I made a few fewer victims, took the Begay family out because they were going to occur in the middle of the investigation. And I said, okay, what can I give the players for every single one of these victims that is a clue that they could latch onto and look further into?
Can you talk a little bit about the changes you made for when the Discorder was in Kenneth Braverman's body?
Mm-hmm.
Because that was a pretty big departure that I really liked.
Right. So I decided that at the beginning, like, Braverman kills his wife and his kids. We don't need a hanger on to this. And then he runs through the reservation and he makes some kills himself. This is where I really wanted to highlight, who the hell is this person? Because I wanted half the murders to be Kenneth Braverman, so that if they got a face, that
Mm.
face changes. And then at some point, the way that Santana is written, he's kind of isolated. He's a little bit of he keeps to himself. He's doesn't live among the community very much. So I was like, maybe he hitches every once in a while. People still did that in the 90s. So he just unfortunately hitches the wrong ride from Braverman at some point, who then kills him, takes his body, and then it goes on. But so that's what I decided, was that Braverman was going to commit some of the acts here. So his face would be tied to some of the crimes, and then at some point it swaps. And then players realize, if they haven't had the story yet, that this is a thing that swaps bodies, now they have to like contend with that. Is this a second person?
Right. I love that.
Did he switch bodies? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we got the guy, and it keeps going.
and it keeps going. Exactly.
I thought the use of Braverman there actually did a really good job of explaining why some of these tourists were actual victims. Because there's a few of them where, right, they pull off to the side of the road, he takes them away, and we kind of came across it like, that's so strange. Does this person have mental powers? What's underlying? Why would they go with someone? And then that drop of, wait, what if they're law enforcement? And they are in on this, and that was a wonderful, not a red herring, but it raised such suspicion with the local racist sheriff and everything, to be like, is there something deeper going on? Like, is the sheriff doing this to people because he's terrible? Like, what is this? Now, it's not, it's Mr. Alien, but that sort of paranoia is exactly what you want.
And that's exactly what you want in Delta Green. Yeah, I love that.
I think you guys had come to that conclusion that, or this, that you had thought that it might be a police officer before it got that reveal, is what I was trying to remember back on my playthrough.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think Holly did a great job improving the clues, adding her own clues into the scenario. I know one thing that actually got us to the traveler's location was having dirt from a certain area
Mm.
be from the sacred cave, and we got that identified and the sacred cave identified. And then we were able to do an ambush.
I think if I were to run it again, and I think you guys kind of cover that later in this, so maybe I'm jumping the gun a bit, but I have a better idea for how to improve on that, even for future playthroughs.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I think the cave is not, it's whatever. It's not
Mhm.
super exciting as a location. And I was reading some playthroughs online. Someone had done this like beautiful narrative write-up, like from the viewpoint of like their players. And there was a showdown at Santana, had this like isolated, because again, they imagined him as like a doomsday prepper kind of. So he had this cabin in the middle of nowhere that was like booby trapped, and he was in the attic, like, and it was like his sniper's nest. And as soon as they got close, he would start shooting at them. So I liked that a lot better. And I was hoping, when I did it with you guys, I was hoping to get you there, and then it didn't happen, and that's fine. But I think in retrospect, because you guys never really learned who Santana was,
Right.
When you go to the Begay family and you realize that they're dead, and there's a neighbor figure that is a John Rope, I think his name is written in the scenario. He kind of like comes over and talks with you a little bit. And I like the idea of him dropping like, oh yeah, old Manny Santana was over there visiting them last night, or whatever. And because they all know him, he's a member of this tribe, like they know this person. And then it's like, who, what now? And if they go looking through, I think I did this in my very first playthrough. They went looking through county records, and they had to talk to some people, because again, he's like this off the grid person. If they talked to the tribal police who would know him, they point him to this doomsday like shack in the middle of nowhere, in which you could have like a showdown with him. So I think that's probably how I do. I think the way I'd written it, I got you guys to the cave, and I had the kids recognize Santana because they knew him. Again, they're all part of this community. And I thought maybe you would follow that trail and see and if you could track him down, and you didn't, and that's totally fine, because it makes sense to wait him out. Like, oh, he's going to come back. Of course he's going to come back. We're going to get him then.
Mhm.
So it worked out in the end that way. But I think I like the idea of a shootout at like a Doomsday Prepper Shack better. The idea of like booby traps everywhere, kind of True Detective.
Landmines.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
True Detective-ish, where it's like,
Yep.
you know, there's booby traps all over this place and he's ready for you. And I don't know. It's just a thought.
No, I really like that. I especially like how you made Manny Santana just sort of this local figure that would be off the grid, and it's truly an instance of the townsfolks are happy to give advice on them, but the agents never knew to ask. And it's just this
Mhm.
complete under the radar, wait, who? And it's like, oh yeah, it's Manny. He's just kind of he's around, he's a nice guy. Where's he at again?
So another point I would add is if I've started the players as Delta Green, I would just give them all the info that Miss Green was gonna send them anyway, like in this big folder, because they should already be equipped with as much information as possible. Instead of playing games and having it given to them. That way they can start being proactive
Mm.
and understanding the threat.
I want to kind of dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you guys think Miss Green's long-term plan was here? As written, she gives agents this clue of bodies. Then she waits around to see what they do, I guess. She doesn't try and interfere with the autopsy to kill the creature. She doesn't do much of anything as far as I can tell.
She seems like a contact that recruits the non-Delta Green players characters, because I think
Yeah.
overall this was written for non-Delta Green player
Right.
characters.
So would you move the Miss Green portion? Because as written, it's after the autopsy, after everything's done. She has a scene where she acts real cool and jumps in a car with a NASCAR driver apparently and zips away before the
Yeah,
agents can do anything.
80% drive,
Which
but also it's 100% drive because they always get away.
yes, the advice is to just let her get away. Which tonally, it's very strange to have a cool handler. Like I'm reminded of is that Mean Girls? I'm not like the other handlers. I'm a
I'm a
cool
cool
handler.
handler.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Um but she has this discussion with them. She can get them into Delta Green, and that I think is supposed to be the long term, right? Is the next mission maybe you're a friendly, the mission after that you're a full agent. Maybe if you were doing a campaign, you'd work with that. But why then? Why doesn't she show up when they're, about to do the stakeout and say, "Hey, by the way, I know this is an alien and you need to really kill this thing." You lose the autopsy, but it gives her a little bit more oomph and reason to be doing anything. Is if she could kind of find that right moment to pick up these agents and say, I know you've seen something weird. It really is aliens. You're not crazy. And you need to shoot this thing more times than you think you need to.
Yeah. I agree with all these points. I think, as written, her role is to be the cool Matrix Reloaded character that can ride off into the sunset and think, wow, Delta Green's really great. As for actual motivations and things that Miss Green could be using in this, I really envisioned that Delta Green would also be sitting back, and they may recognize that this entity is really dangerous. They have been following this trail of bodies from Kenneth Braverman to all of these other ones back, so they know that this thing is extremely lethal. They're not eager to jump into the fray and tango with this thing, so they're using the player characters who are non-DG, not even friendlies. They're using the player characters as cat's paws and saying, hey, here's all these things, it's an alien, you should go find it over there. We're gonna hang back and just keep an eye on things. Okay, it's fine, don't worry about it.
That's how the driver survived long enough to get that 80% in drive.
Exactly. And so I really imagined maybe it's sort of supplanting the majestic role in this, but there may be other shady characters around the town that, like, if they try to stop and question them, they give some kind of weird excuses and they constantly just disappear. They try to get away and wriggle out, and they may fight to actually get away from people. But then at the shootout, at the showdown, at something, there are people in Sniper's Purchase, and it's been clear that they have also been followed, and every time that they get out and do something, they have someone with a hunting rifle perched up watching them with an eagle-eye view to try and also take pot shots at this thing if they can flush him out.
I threw Miss Green out entirely.
I'm shocked.
Bam, right in the garbage.
I threw Miss Green out, but also, an option. Giving players all the information at the beginning is interesting. I wanted this to be brand new. No one knew anything about it. Delta Green had been tracking it. So what I did was I changed some of the articles that immediately would ping their radar. If they go look into Kenneth Braverman, which they will, of course, they'll find out that he had been responsible for, he was suspected of a bunch of murders in Houston before beating feet over, across the border. So what I did was, when they search Kenneth Braverman, they find this other article in which he is commended and awarded by the mayor of Houston for taking down the notorious New Orleans cannibal killer, which then should immediately ping everyone's radar. Excuse me? And then if they go back and they look at who the New Orleans cannibal killer was, because it'll say like, oh, he had a history of homelessness, and then he fled New Orleans after eating a bunch of people. Then that starts the trail, which players can follow or not follow if they want. But like it goes further back and further back. And this guy ate that guy, and that guy ate. That's almost like a book in the Bible. This guy begets this guy, begets this guy, but he eats this guy who ate that guy who ate that guy.
How did you make that have an impact on the game? Because that's something I had trouble figuring out. Is obviously you did a really good job of making Braverman matter, because like that body was used. But once you start going back, does it matter as much that they find out about these?
It doesn't. I don't think I've ever played a game where people follow the trail far enough back to get to West Virginia. They'll they'll see New Orleans, maybe they'll follow the New Orleans lead, and then they'll see it leads to Nashville, and they're like, okay, I think I have enough of this story. And you certainly don't want players on a cross-country road trip to go track it down. So yeah, I've never had a game where people followed that trail all the way to its origins.
And this was one thought that I had regarding the Traveler, the Discorder, that he's carrying his ship around him all the time in a handy-dandy backpack. And I thought that it would make a lot more sense that his ship was damaged on arrival, and that in addition to like eating all these bodies and having a great time, he would be looking for parts and pieces, but Earth technology is not necessarily as advanced as what he needs to try and fix the tire on his ship, metaphorically speaking. So at each of these, if they do follow it a little further back, they may find these robberies of weird science stuff that is incidental in each of them. And then if they follow, like, not for the whole time, but if they get 2 or 3 of these points, if anyone has a modicum of science or engineering or even just a high intelligence, you can give them like, it seems like they're building something. It's bits and pieces, but this is like astronaut propulsion bullshit. And at least give them some more clues that way. Alex, you got a look on your face.
Yeah, I love that idea of having the Discorder picking up these pieces everywhere they go, because you're right. Yes, it is additional clues that the players can pick up on, and they can start formulating their own ideas. Maybe the clues, these parts that the Traveler is getting, maybe they're all of a specific chemical or a type. So, and at each location,
like they're all the same element or something. It's all cobalt pieces.
Yes, and they're being grabbed up. And maybe let's just say that there is a storage facility with this chemical, so maybe they can even be proactive and stage an ambush there.
I like that. Yeah,
that's fun.
On top of that, go ahead.
I was thinking almost, if you want to bring our favorite busybodies Phenomenex into it, there could be a Phenomenex blog about the meteor shower and what it could all mean. And then there could be some Phenomenex articles online, some blog posts about it that could also like steer people in a certain direction too. But go ahead, Alex, you had a better thought than I did.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far. But I mentioned earlier that we can give the Traveler some new abilities. Like maybe you can spit acid. Maybe we can even rob another ability just wholesale from another scenario, right? Like minor spoilers for Victim of the Art. There's a weird gray substance. Why can't we have this alien here in Puppet Shows and Shadows plays leave a weird gray substance, which can be used to track it. So once again, adding more clues for the players to become proactive.
Yeah, maybe the alien has to actually sort of like a starfish exude itself from the body, so it's only vulnerable when it feeds. And so that they have to do that, and that's what leaves some goop that the agents can try and find.
And I want to talk a little bit about the alien because I do think the angle of a drug addicted alien is actually pretty interesting, right? Is this is a creature as presented in the write up, it's pretty intelligent and doesn't really make mistakes per se, right? Is it's not doing anything stupid. And traditionally, drug addicts tend not to have the perhaps best judgment in the world. So if this thing is, getting a thrill from the person's pain, they're going to be running into not just murder, but they might be having him, like was mentioned, hold up a convenience store or stand in the middle of the highway during rush hour, right? There are things that they would be having this person do that might bring them to the attention that at first, right, it's harmless. Is who cares? This guy did something stupid, but incredibly dangerous and scary. But that might give you kind of a clue of like, you know what, we've been seeing Santana around a lot and he's been acting strange.
I think that that's interesting. I think where my mind was going in terms of if this entity is addicted to adrenochrome that people tend to secrete whenever we're having that fight or flight, that hyper stressed, whatever responses. I like Holly's idea of taking the kids. Maybe they, like, since they're younger, they secrete more of it or something, but sort of setting things up like an abattoir. And you want to keep these people alive and you're kind of milking them like blood bags because it's really inefficient just to kill it and go. So you could almost be trying to set up like was it the plot point of Blade 1, Blade 2, where they have all the people in like the Capri Sun bags and we're trying to just milk everything out of them. But like you have these people trapped and just keep poking them to torture them or something like that.
Lucky.
Just to give it a little greater aspirations.
And if you want to make some of the aliens bits creepier, because I thought it was neat, we had the shootout, but we really only interacted very briefly with Santana. I'm not sure, did we ever
we
even
lit him
talk
the
with him?
fuck up.
Yeah,
Yeah, you didn't get any interactions with him.
because it would be really interesting to have the alien seed the vocal cords during like a fight and just have Santana like pleading for his life or it's not me, it's not me, as he's gunning you down is kind of a creepy
That's great.
addition to
I
this.
love
that's
that.
very
Like,
good.
I love because that was also sort of my thought that if it's connecting sort of at the base of the neck to cut off spinal column there, their face may still be able to move. And I always love the idea of someone that's their torment is they're like, no, please, as they like are being forced to eat people. But then, yeah, like as it's distracted in the firefight, Santana can regain some control of just his face. As I'm just imagining like he's like shooting all these people, screaming, kill me, please, kicking ass, blowing up a cop car.
And just
get good.
Yeah, get good. I just want to make the point as well that this is basically just Animorphs. If you wanted to kick this straight up into an Animorphs campaign, here you go. You got it in one. Here's the Yerks for you.
You heard it here, folks. Now for reanimorphing. So speaking of things we'd like to cut out, how do you all feel about the coyote spirit in Nyarlathotep?
I don't know. It just seems problematic.
I ran it as written the first time I ran it, and the players, it's aside from the like, oh, the coyote's doing all the work here, like digging up bodies, He's working 2 jobs. He's the hardworking coyote.
He's got kids to feed.
Yeah, he's doing all the work, which I don't love just from a handler perspective of my agents aren't actually doing anything. I tried to do the whole like he leads them to the cave, and my players just kind of weren't picking up what I was putting down when they were like, "What is this even?" Because it is a little out there. It's a little different from what you would put in investigations. I can't really speak to the Native American lore of it all. I'm not a member of that community. I don't know how it was handled and the accuracy of it, but just the
Don't assume good.
I'm not assuming anything. That's my point. Like I don't know anything. So I would just say it just feels lazy more than anything. Like if you take out what if it could be problematic or not problematic, whatever. It's just kind of lazy, like to just have this element that gives your players all of the answers that they could possibly need. So just like I didn't like it. And then I only recently read the new version where they turned it into Nyarlathotep, and that just made it even more confusing to me rather than anything else. I was like, what? If the coyote spirit had been used in some interesting way, that might have been a point to talk about, but it wasn't. It was just like, here are your answers. Coyote is single mom working hard, 2 jobs, you know.
Right. That's with me, the Native American angle felt poorly written and fairly problematic. And
It probably is. It very much probably
I'm
is.
gonna have to agree with Lex here, right? Because either way you look at it, right? You're saying, oh, this Native American religion or ritual just summons Nyarlathotep, which is
that's
like some
crazy.
evil
That for
fucking
sure.
thing.
Yeah.
Or you say that, oh, Native American magic is real.
And all of the NPCs that are here, like they're all nervous, and that's the line that's as written. It says, "Oh, it must be spirits." I'm like, come on, my guy.
Iffy.
Like it felt extremely reductive.
Yeah. It's
Just
not
don't.
it's not good writing. Like
Yeah,
here it does
right.
all the work for you. It's if nothing else, it's just not good writing.
How do you
But
improve it? Drop it. Okay.
just drop it.
Got it. Excise it.
Well, and there's no real way for players to find this out, right? Is they can come across the sand drawing that what was his name? Palmer made, and they could later realize if you put this into a full campaign, they could recognize Stephen Alves and be like, aha, the fate, they must have reached out to him, especially for a one shot. This is a non sequitur, right? You run
Yeah.
across this good looking guy made in sand on the floor. I don't quite know what they're supposed to do with that, and it seems like a distraction.
Yeah. Yeah. It just doesn't really tie into anything. It just feels like you said, like a non sequitur, just kind of out of place in all of it.
Yeah, maybe if they'd kept Alex, I think you mentioned in the original they had suggested that it might be Palmer's spirit given form. And that I can actually almost buy as, maybe just have his ghost running around. But it still runs into that problem of why are you letting the ghost do all the work? Just let the agents do it. Just
Right.
let them do it.
It's almost like by improving the main investigation the way Holly has, you don't even need to have a coyote do all the work for you.
Yeah.
Holly did put in a ton of work, it seems. So
yeah, I could, I it's probably not the best use of our time here. I could go through all the clues that I added and
Please do.
Like I said, I was determined to make it so that every single murder scene, missing person scene had something that the people could follow up on. So my timeline, I changed around. The gas station attendant is the first person to go. And the agents can pull up CCTV and see that a man who kind of has an air of authority, if they have good what would be, I'm trying to think of the good, like bureaucracy, then they'll recognize that he's wearing like a police officer's uniform. Like, it's grainy, so maybe they couldn't see it otherwise. He kind of approaches with an air of authority, flashes a badge, directs Felix to come with him outside, and Felix is never heard from again. But then they have that. They're like, okay, I think that's what tipped you guys off. They're like, it's a fucking cop. It's a cop, and this is why this is all happening. And then the second person I changed to be a prostitute who is working at one of the gas stations, a different one, a Love's Travel Stop. And she never returns to her babysitter to get her child in the morning, and she's reported missing. If they talk to any of the other workers in the area, they'll say like, oh yeah, she was talking to this guy. And again, he had a look of a cop, because sex workers probably do, have that, like they can kind of identify people. Like he had a look of a cop. I told her not to go, but she went anyway, and here she is. And then the reservoir, the 2 fishermen, is his last murder, and I changed up the timelines and when they get the handout, the player handout, God bless this group, Nathan, Alex, Matt, Sanderson, you guys were clever. You saw it immediately. I put a week gap because so it was going at a consistent week. Every week he would kill somebody. And then there was a gap where he didn't do it for 2 weeks. And that's because you changed bodies. So if they go to the reservoir where the 2 men were fishing, if they follow the leads, they'll find the men's car has been pushed into the reservoir. Their bodies are in it.
Hmm.
And the badge of Kenneth Braverman is in the car. The HPD.
Oh, I love that.
We missed
Kenneth
that.
Braverman badge. Yeah. And so then if they call around, they're like, okay, who the fuck is Kenneth Braverman? They manage he's probably got an alias. If they do enough work, they'll figure it out. They'll find out where he is staying under a false alias. But his car, his body's just in the trunk. His car is parked at this inn, and his body's in the trunk with like a bunch of cat litter, whatever would, make it not smell so terrible. And he's moved on. So now your players are like, it's another person and we have no fucking clue who it is.
Mhm.
Who is this person now?
Mm-hmm.
If the German tourists, if they had a little boy, if they go to the place where the car was abandoned, they can, I believe I had it so that one of the bodies was just buried and the police just didn't catch it. And then of course the last one is the little girl was still left in the car. So that's what draws them in the beginning. So those are like a kind of, it's not a particularly strong string of clues, but it's a string of clues that they can at least discover if they put in the work to investigate, and not even a lot of work.
And there's always something they can find. Like
Exactly.
there is a reward for their efforts, and it can
Yeah.
help further along the narrative.
Right. It's not just, it's a dead end.
Yeah. Or here's everything.
Right. It gave us an idea of the pattern that this thing followed, which really felt like one of these clues or investigations, rather, where what you're trying to do is create this pattern to what seems like a random number of killings in order that you can predict where the next strike will be and cut it off.
Yeah. So, but yeah, there should definitely be once they find the body of Kenneth Braverman, there should be a moment of like, not just oh fuck, but like now who, and that's when you can have the Begay family come up dead, and then they have something to go digging into, and then the neighbor or the dirt. There's like a bunch of different ways. The neighbor can say like, oh yeah, Manny was visiting with them last night. I'm sure glad that he's okay, or that he, doesn't seem like he was targeted or something like, and but then that should lead you to who the hell is Manny? And it's funny, when I was reading Santana's write-up, for whatever reason, I had a total brain fart where I thought it was implying that he had been in a Delta Green operation during the Vietnam War. And I thought that was really interesting and compelling. And I'm like, why aren't they expounding on that more? Why? I want to know more about this. But no, I just read it wrong.
That's honestly cool as hell, though. I would actually love that. Like, there's your reason why Delta Green is involved. If they catch a whiff that like one of their agents is potentially going rogue, then that could be so much to explore in there.
Yeah. So something that might be interesting. You'd have to, put in a little work and think about how you want to do it. But yeah, I genuinely thought for a minute, maybe not Delta Green, but maybe a friendly or someone that had just gotten caught up in a Delta Green operation, which then makes it a little more interesting. But no, I'd read it wrong.
Holly, can we get your discussion of kind of the happy accident of how Chase's character was included in this?
It was so good. So when I had, I ran it for Into the Darkness, and we gathered all of our players, and Chase, one of my players, had never ever played Delta Green. And I think there was a little hesitancy there. And so when I explained the structure of like friendlies and agents and programs, and I mean, it's the cowboy years anyway, he was like, he hooked on to the friendly thing, because I felt maybe he thought, well, I don't necessarily know how to role play this, so I can play a friendly. And so he's like, can I play someone who, or not even a friendly, can I play someone who has never, like, is not a Delta Green agent, the FBI agent that just gets called into this as his normal job, not even a friendly. It's like, yes, absolutely, you can do that. So he gets called in, and he's deemed the lead investigator. And then he gets the ragtag team of the rest of them, who I think originally thought maybe he was a friendly at least. Nope, this guy has no clue. And so you have to balance this. How much do we tell him? At some point, the scales tip and he has to know. He
Yeah,
has to know.
We got him a cake when he finally found out the truth about the unnatural.
But
Welcome to
that,
the...
like, we really played into the Majestic angle at that point.
Mhm.
Became super interesting because then Majestic contacts him and he's like, the guys that you're working with, they're like a terrorist group, anti-government. They, you know, we work for the government and they are this shady organization that works against government interests and against the you know, against the safety of the American people. You need to give us all of the information that you're learning
I love
instead.
that all
Yeah.
so much. That's so interesting. I'm gonna have to watch the playthrough now.
And
Yeah.
and without getting to spoilers too, it really did not go great long term for that character in a really cool way.
So then, yeah, so then you have a person that has to make these decisions, and heightened even more because, again, like Chase, it worked out beautifully because Chase just didn't know the lore of like Majestic and Delta Green super well. So then it was like, maybe in his head, he's like, wait, are these guys like something I don't know about? Are they some underground thing? Are these guys the real Delta Green agents? What's going on? So it was
These
actually really
guys are
interesting.
all huge assholes. What
Everyone
the
is
hell?
telling me not to. And then I think he
They all
eventually
have
like,
disorders.
Everyone's an asshole.
I think he eventually told you guys, and you're like, no, don't trust them. And so then you have like Majestic saying, don't trust Delta Green, and Delta Green saying, don't trust Majestic. And you're just kind of caught in the middle going, I have no idea who to trust.
Delta Green says, "Who's that? We're the group." Oh,
So yeah, I would super recommend doing that. It's an interesting dynamic. I don't know necessarily that it is accurate to like how Delta Green operates. I think someone may have called me out on that in a video, but I was like, I don't know, it's fun.
Well, that would be good if you had a couple players. Like this case, most of us were familiar with Delta Green, but maybe you only have one player that is familiar with Delta Green.
Right.
Have them play the one agent, and everyone else is just FBI.
Right.
mm-hmm.
I think that's how you really make it a fun intro to Delta Green, especially if you can rope someone in that you know who's played it forever. You know, like, yeah, come help me introduce these newbies to Delta Green.
Oh, that's great. Nathan, Alex, after all of this, if you were going to run this scenario, are there any other changes, or how would you want this to run at your table?
I would make it thrilling intense.
Ah, what great instruction for us.
I'd follow the instructions written in the book. I would definitely run it with Holly's changes. And I'm kind of on the fence between having all the player characters be non-Delta Green at all. And on top of that, I would definitely add the new clues so they can be proactive.
I think I run into the problem too is at some level for me, if I ran this with just the changes and made them all not Delta Green at the beginning, this kind of goes out of the realm of being Delta Green for me, right? Because I don't really like the Miss Green angle. She's a little too just randomly there. So at that point it becomes just investigators encountering the unknown, which just kind of feels like Call of Cthulhu. Like
Mm.
I think you're missing some of the whole point of Delta Green, right? Is you kind of want to have that Majestic, and you want to have some tie in to the conspiracy, or else what are we doing here? Um, and I think if I was gonna run this, I'm not gonna run this as a one shot. Like as written with the clues they have, it doesn't make sense to me to run this unless you are specifically going to use the Fate as a later organization and include some aspect of that. There's just too many references, too many little things that you could come up with later. What's the point if you're not going to go in that direction?
Mm.
So since I'd be running this as non-Delta Green PCs, I would definitely like cut out Miss Green, have them find out the history of these killings, these cannibalism, through their own research. Because like you have to kind of shape the scenario around the PCs that you're being used. So like I said, if I was using Delta Green, I definitely have the information given to them automatically at the beginning with the newspaper clippings. and add in the reason why Delta Green's there in the first place, i.e., with Holly's dead child with chemicals injected.
So, what would you guys do as an escalation if the players don't find these clues, right? So, as written, they kind of just get them anyways. But if you take that out, there's the possibility that the players are stymied for in game weeks, not probably actually that long in a session, hopefully, but they're sitting there. What do you think this traveler's next move is?
Oh, it'll definitely make a mistake the more it kills, right?
And it's going to keep taking more people. Like, people are going to continue dropping.
And why not have it take the agents?
Ooh.
Right? If they're going to be staking out and they're foolish enough to have only 1 or 2 people stake out the locations, they're going to get attacked, or have that clue where it needs to get something to fix its spaceship and it's robbing a store for its elements.
I'm just seeing 2 potential avenues with that. I love the idea that the traveler, the discorder, would take one of the PCs if they're dumb, as like a very real way of saying there can be consequences if you're going to be an idiot, and that like they may be gone. You could potentially give them a pre-generated player character that would be a Delta Green agent that saw that happen, and that they were like, oh no, I'm not, why are you going in there? And maybe the one to report back to the rest of the other investigators and just say like, hey, there's this going on and we need to talk. Or if it's a really crappy player, you give them the racist but charming cop, and then that's their replacement pre-gen.
Now I'm just envisioning this scene where you do, like you were saying, Alex, you have this lone agent and the serial killer just walks in the door and is like, hey, how's it going? I killed all these people. Let the agent shoot them a couple times
Oh yeah.
and tranquilize them. If they fail to fight, it tranquilizes them. And then the next time they meet that person, it's going, can you believe I shot the serial killer? We're in the clear, boys. Wrap it up. We're going home.
That's funny.
Oh, that could be really great though, if you actually let them kill him in the cave or in the doomsday shack or something, and then you can recreate the autopsy scene from the trunk of the car. That like as they're driving, the
that's
back
cool.
seat gets cratered in, and then there's these tendrils whipping around inside. Roll drive at -40.
I could definitely see a possibility for PvP if you let the traveler if someone gets to play the traveler. That'd be cool. Like if they do end up getting tranquilized while they're alone, it'll just fade to black, and then you'll have the scene where the next day where the player character is given control of the traveler, really.
Now I just want the traveler to turn to one of the agents and be like, why would you do this to me, brother? And then die.
Uh-oh.
Brutal.
Well, with all this done, we've mentioned Michael Shea's The Autopsy quite a bit, which is basically the beginning of this scenario. It's actually on page 4. If you purchase the scenario, you'll see that there is a Dr. Brenton Clark that basically is the victim of the autopsy. Are there any other bits of media that you might recommend to try and help inspire some more reanimations or ideas for this?
No,
The
next
big,
question.
how dare you? I am the host now. Banned.
No.
One of the ones that really came to mind while reading this is with the conflicts between the FBI trying to come in and take control of the case versus local law enforcement, this, that, and the other. Reminded me a lot of the movie Wind River with Elizabeth Olsen and I think Jeremy Renner. It's, in my opinion, pretty good. And I think it can do a lot with local frustrations for people just coming in, don't know anything about how the land works, and then kind of letting them blunder. And also showing how there can be a dearth of resources at the local investigation places. So they may need to rely more on person power because they don't have like riot gear and SWAT teams at the ready.
Yeah, I think for me, if I was looking for just a tone sort of thing, I'd look at No Country for Old Men. Just that kind of sparse feeling, that bleakness of it, really, I think works with the killer aspect of this.
So is the proper greeting for the Discorder is calling everyone friendo?
Yeah, and he makes them flip coins.
With all that, do you all have any additional ideas to help expand the scenario if you would want?
I mean, it's ready for the fate. We kind of talked about that earlier. It's got the breadcrumbs there to lead into it. So I haven't read Eyes Only. I'm really looking forward to it with the reprint. Hopefully that would have some tools you could use to make your own thing, or maybe even have some scenarios that you could tie into this.
So I have not read Eyes Only. The Stephen LZ's references just kind of went over my head. It just seemed like a lot of nothing. This is something that's established as canon. You've also mentioned the Fate.
Yeah.
Just for listeners like me who don't know what that is.
It's long story short, because I am not as familiar with them as I plan to be once the book comes out. Nyarlathotep has a club and leads the group called the Fate,
Hmm.
and that's pretty much it. He's the Stephen Elvis,
Stephen Elvis. Yes.
Stephen Elvis, this cool cucumber is kind of hinted that he could be the avatar of Nyarlathotep, but they like to keep it vague in kind of the same way they did in this one, where it goes, It could be, maybe not though. Isn't that fun?" And yeah, as a handler, I kind of want to be just. It's okay. We can be in on the secret. Just let me know.
The real secret is that Stephen Elvis guy is just a poser. The real avatar, as we well know, is Lester Goodman.
I like the idea if you play the majestic angle and, assuming your PCs don't buy in, because I'm assuming most of them probably wouldn't, is that they're now on Majestic's radar. And if you run convergence in the future with those same people, where Majestic also has a huge presence, like it could really bite them in the ass.
That's fun.
You know what'd be interesting?
Mm.
Have Majestic recruit the PCs if
I also love
DG
that.
doesn't
I would love a Majestic
recruit
campaign.
the PCs.
And at that point, you just roll them right into Jack Frost, where they're also playing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's like the
Ooh.
only written Delta Green, I think, the only written Delta Green scenario that players are Majestic agents rather than
Which
Delta
I
Green.
have also heard you have done some heavy revisions to help improve and
Yeah,
reanimate
it needed a facelift, but that's for another story. A story for another day, rather. But yeah, you could. There's ways you could take it. Now it doesn't really expand on the ideas put forth here. It's more of a just what the decisions your players have made. Just follow them in future scenarios regarding Majestic.
I could see too, if you wanted to play a little bit more in the idea of like the travelers and stuff, you really could go towards an Animorphs type thing, right? Where people are being controlled secretly and we don't know. And the one here truly was kind of a loose cannon drug addict version, where you might have these other versions of them that go, no, 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 no. We don't usually do this. We usually keep our cannibalism to a minimum, one or two a year, perhaps. And kind of, you might have this undercurrent manipulating society. That could be fun.
I love the idea that there are more of these aliens all over Earth, but this is just a bum. And so we're just following on the tail of this intergalactic serial killer, and then the other aliens are just watching, and it's like, oh, that's just Jeff. Don't worry about him.
How embarrassing.
So if you play into Holly's complete misreading of the scenario that Emmanuel Santana was a Delta Green agent in former life or part of a Delta Green operation, you could still play into that angle. And if your players succeed and do well, Delta Green puts them on this path of like tracking down other former like rogue agents, basically.
Ooh.
I don't know if there's any scenarios written out there like that, but if you want to play around with that idea, write your own things, that could be a part of a trail that they have to keep following is other rogue agents from that same operation. Maybe something happened to all of the men that were and women that were on that operation, and now they're all going rogue or something like that.
Yeah, there's a few shotgun scenarios that you could definitely
Nice.
use. Do we have any war stories we'd want to share? Do you have any favorite moments, Holly?
You guys did just an incredible job. The not birthday cake, the
Yeah,
cake scene.
We gave him a
Which is
birthday cake.
basically it was basically what did it say? Welcome to the end of your life. or
Yeah,
something
welcome to
like
the
that?
beginning of the end of your life.
Yes.
Because
Finally
he's now in
decided
Delta Green.
Chase. Yeah, when Chase was ready to be like formally enveloped into the group, they went to like an Applebee's
Yep.
and brought a cake. I don't know if there were like the clapping people, like the servers or what. It's very funny. The shootout,
That was
between
really good.
Santana was pretty cool. Like you guys just lit him up.
Yeah, and then like he tried to take cover behind his truck, and then like the gas tank was shot, and it just got blown up, and he was on fire. It was awesome.
Alex's character for the entire thing spent a lot of time gunsmithing a lot of very questionable weaponry in
I am
preparation
shocked.
for this.
I'm
You know
shocked.
what I did? I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go to the gun stores. I'm gonna look at them and count the amount of American flags they have, and I'm gonna go to the one with the most. And I go in because like the character I'm playing as is a vet. And I'm like, okay, well, since I'm a vet, you're a vet. Why don't you hand over these machine guns that I'm then gonna convert into fully automatic submachine guns? And that's how
Oh.
we had overwhelming firepower at the end.
Yeah, I remember you and Matt both contributed a lot to that battle, and if I recall correctly, I hid in a car with the spaceship and the child.
with the
children.
kids.
Yeah.
I am also shocked.
Yeah, being like, don't listen, don't listen.
I'm
Don't
completely
cover your
shocked.
ears. Those are just fireworks.
Duck your head because, yep, there we go. Windshield got broken.
If I remember correctly, there was a good tense moment with Chase. Still, when he was like, none of this is real. I had it so that the police officer that was on the scene when the little girl was dead actually interrupted Santana in the middle of him
Yes.
feeding, and he got in a car and drove off. I think it was a cop car even, which was like another huge clue. And the cop that had interrupted all of this was taking a leave of absence due to like great mental stress. And that was like red flags everywhere. Like, who's this guy? Who the fuck is he? And so Chase goes to his trailer, and it's all been like papered up with, because Majestic has been contacting this guy and like bullying him and telling him not to talk to anybody and forget what he saw. So he's like newspapered up all of his windows. He's like full tinfoil hat now. And it was just really tense situation for Chase because he went in alone, and it was like, who is this guy? And everyone else is watching, and it's like, is this the alien? Are we going to lose Chase? Like, 2 hours into this scenario. It was interesting.
And I think that really speaks to, as we're talking through this, you did a good job of keeping those tense moments there and building them into this longer form. I think we took 3 sessions total.
Yeah.
So it's a nice 6-hour game about, and there were still enough moments where we had dread for the future. We had immediate, oh, I'm going to get shot moments. We had plenty of this. And I distinctly remember, for some reason, this one sticks in my head. We go, there's this weird dirt. Well, we're going to need to get it to labs, and we're going to need to do all this stuff. It's like, just ask the neighbor. Just ask the neighbor. He's a farmer. What would the farmer know about dirt? Just ask the neighbor.
I remember the chat. I remember like watching the chat, like, ask the neighbor. Yeah, he's a farmer. He knows the dirt.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, that might have been a bit of a stretch. So to that, I would say that wasn't a super strong connection. Maybe go with the other one in which the neighbor just recognized the guy that was there and it could point them to the other direction. I don't know.
As someone who grew up on farms and cattle ranches in Texas, yeah, no, that's fair, honestly. You'd need to be able to recognize dirt and caliche, stuff like that. Ask the farmer. They know
especially if it's, I kind of had the was envisioning that it's a distinctive dirt. If you're picking it out, it's probably like, oh, that's really extra red or something.
Yeah,
so,
I'm imagining like red dirt too, like Moab or something.
Enough to then they go, oh, you don't see that here. That's more up in the mountains, by the sacred cave.
So another clue I'd like to add is during one of the attacks from the Traveler, if it's using a vehicle, maybe have that vehicle have one of its bottom parts punctured and now it's leaking oil, so they'll see the oil at the crime scene and then be able to follow it back to wherever it's driving.
I think that's excellent. 100%.
Yeah, really any clue that you can give that will keep people moving towards another clue is going to be a big improvement here. Is just keeping momentum will really help keep the tension high on this instead of having a clue that seems exciting but it doesn't get you anywhere.
Agree.
You know what the true missed opportunity is here in the
Hmm.
90s? Like, not that far from this reservation, but not on the reservation. There truly was a Route 666 running through America at that time. It wasn't until 2000 something that they changed it to like Highway 70, whatever. And I'm like, the Devil's Highway. That's the Devil's Highway. First of all,
Yeah.
why are you calling this the Devil's Highway? That's the Devil's Highway.
We hope our deranged utterings are helpful in bringing this game to life at your table. You can join the autopsy discussion on Discord and subscribe or follow the podcast to hear more gruesome cases. Be sure to check out the show notes for links on where to find the scenario, where to find us, and other links for things like handouts, Holly's actual play of the scenario that we recommend, and any other resources. So until next time, thanks for listening to RPG Reanimators.
Where your games can die.
Or live.
On the table.
We're all just angry about stuff now, huh?
Just
Not
because it's
me.
popular doesn't mean it's bad.
That's right. Lex has never been angry
I'm
in his
completely
life.
at peace in a sea of tranquility.
That's because Green Mile style, you've just vomited out all the hate you had.
I would have said Exorcist, but sure, yeah, let's go with that too.
Pea soup? You had some pea soup for lunch?
That
You've
green soup.
excised the traveler out of your own body.
That's it.
Ugh. I do think Discorder is a much cooler name, and I'm going to stand by that. Is it dumber? Yes, but I like it more.